of our three-part webinar series. So glad you can join us. And just before we dive into things, I wanted to remind everyone that we're really hoping for this to be, as much as possible, an interactive conversation. So our next webinar next week will really just be focused on conversation with all of you. But even in this session, we'd encourage you to share thoughts, questions, comments throughout the webinar in that chat box. So just to make sure everyone's familiar with it and to start to get a little feedback, I'd love to just test this out by having you answer one quick question. So my question is, what would you like to learn today? What are you most interested in learning in this webinar? So take a minute and just type your answer out right here in the chat box, and I'll do the same. So Liz said how other folks are working and what's effective about that. Maya said a new secret sauce that I didn't know before. Tina said concrete examples of public interest design practices that make money. That's a great question. Forrest said do more for more people without losing our shirt. Yes, definitely. Alejandra said learn about career pathways while pursuing work in public interest design. We'll definitely talk about that. All right, so we'll definitely circle back to some of these questions and keep adding more questions if you have them. We'll have some time at the end to discuss questions. But for right now, let's dive in. So I want to just give you a quick overview of what we'll talk about today. First, I'm going to share a bit about my own path over the past 10 years, kind of what I've learned along the way and specific insights related to careers in public interest design. Then I'll share a little bit of the background on how we got started doing some of this research and what we learned through that process. And then I'll dive into the strategies themselves, a sampling of different strategies from all the research we've done. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how you can find your own secret sauce. A little, foreshadowing, there isn't one secret sauce, there's many. And finally, I'll share just a few quick opportunities that are on the horizon for folks who are really interested in learning more and getting more engaged. So let's dive in. So I want to start with just a little bit of who I am. And I know there's a lot of text on this page, so don't worry about reading it all. The point here is that I sometimes struggle with explaining what I do, especially to my parents and especially to my grandparents. And over the years, I've tried to refine it into these 4 buckets, into these different types of work I do. A lot of client-driven graphic design and research work. I help manage and run a space. I do a bunch of freelance research and writing. And I work as an editor and publisher as well. And each of those have kind of different facets to them, different types of stuff that goes along with each. But the way I think about it is more like this. Information design and client-driven work is really what pays the bills for me. It's what enables me to, continue eating food every day and being able to live comfortably. Civic Dialogue is really about this collective that I started here in New Orleans called the Blue House. And it's what I'm investing in. It's what I'm personally passionate about and what I want to spend a lot of my time doing. Learn, but regardless is very valuable because it enables me to keep learning and keep growing professionally. And then finally, writing is really just about how I think and share things. It's really a processing approach for me, thinking through ideas and being able to synthesize them and communicate them effectively. So all of this is just to say that each area of work that I engage in provides something different for me. And that's an important lesson or insight about pursuing careers in public interest design, pursuing multiple avenues for work. So finding what is the thing that's going to pay your bills, what is the thing that's going to really get you up every day in the morning and inspire you to go to work and get work done, and what is the thing that's a long-term pursuit that you're working towards, and what are the other mediums that you use to fulfill all of your professional, personal, and creative pursuits. So especially in a field like this that's always rapidly changing and evolving and requires so many different types of work, it's really important to think about different avenues for work and not all of them are going to pay equally, and not all of them are going to fulfill all of your needs. You shouldn't be putting all your eggs in one basket, because if you're waiting for that one full-time career opportunity that's going to do everything for you, you're going to be waiting for quite a long time. So try and find ways to piece together each part of what you need, maybe through different parts of your one job, or maybe through multiple jobs, or maybe through volunteer opportunities that you're engaging in outside of your professional life. So I just want to back up now a little bit to how I got here, how I ended up having these 4 buckets, and what I've learned along the way. So really, this begins all the way back in college. I was part of an organization at Cornell University called Design Connect. And this was essentially a student-run community design center, although I didn't have the language to describe it in that way at the time. I just saw it as a really interesting way to apply some of my own design skills to be doing meaningful work in communities in our own neighborhood, in our own backyard. So I learned a lot through that process. And this image is from the first project I worked on in a town called Owego, where basically a flood had destroyed the foundation of a building. It had been torn down, and the community had responded to an RFP looking for support in some visioning and planning services. So through this process, I learned how to lead a community design and planning meeting. I learned about participatory methodologies in design, and I learned how to manage a real project. This was a really, really amazing opportunity to get involved in while I was still in school, to start seeing what this work looked like before I was even in a professional setting. And I stayed involved in the organization for a number of years and ended up in a leadership position in the organization. And as you can see, we did a number of projects in towns and municipalities all around Ithaca. And we were trying to track a lot of our impact and sort of see what we were accomplishing overall. Now, I want to point out that all of this would not be possible without the help of a few really dedicated mentors, both in the community and professors at Cornell. And I think that's really the key point I want to emphasize here, to find your mentors. This was something that I learned not only in school, but has happened again and again throughout my professional career. But I found mentors who are doing the kind of work that I want to be doing, who are willing to share advice, expertise, and even actual resources and tools. And what I've found time and time again is in this space of community design, public interest design, social impact design, whatever we want to call it, people who are practicing want to bring more people in. And so if you're interested in an area of work, if you know someone who's doing this work and you want to learn more about it, reach out to them, find a mentor. And this reminds me of a talk that I heard a few years ago. Michael Beirut, one of the founders of Pentagram, explained how mentors were so important to him, and explained that even today in his 50s, he finds some amazing new mentors. And someone asked, oh, well, does that mean your mentors are 80 or 90 years old? And he said, no, oftentimes the best mentors are 10 or 20 years younger than me. I learn from people who have new experiences that I haven't been a part of. So that's just to say that it's really important not just to think of your mentors as these old women or old men who are graying and can share all their wisdom with you, but people who are your peers or people who are even younger than you, who have just had different experiences, who can share really valuable input. So with the advice of many mentors, I tried to pursue different opportunities. I tried to find ways to continue learning. The first was an amazing opportunity right after school to have a fellowship studying community engaged design education. And this report is online, it's free. I can share the link with anyone who's interested. And at the same time, I pursued some other opportunities. I was fortunate enough to get an internship with a nonprofit out in San Francisco called Public Architecture, where Maya actually worked as well. And got to engage in different research around small scale public interest design interventions going on, and write and research about it. And I also started working with a few clients on producing events, on doing sort of data entry work, and on doing some research and reporting. I even at this point had already started working with Maya on the early stages of practices. And what I was recognizing is that each one of these opportunities, while they weren't perfect and they weren't exactly what I wanted to be doing, they were providing me a little bit of an inroads into the type of work that I wanted to do. And that was the next kind of big insight that I came to, doing the work that gets you in the door. So on each of the projects that I was working on over the course of 2 or 3 years, I wasn't able to focus specifically on the exact thing I was most passionate on, or the thing that I thought was really going to advance my career most efficiently. But I was able to work with people I knew I wanted to work with organizations I knew I wanted to partner with, and focus on issues that I knew I wanted to learn more about. So I think it's really important, especially in this space of public interest design that's so complex and so multifaceted, to pursue any opportunities that you have to get your foot in the door and start working with the people or organizations or on the issues that you know you want to be working on long term. So for me, this led to even more research, writing, and design work. I was really fortunate to be able to start working with enterprise community partners, an organization focused on affordable housing and ending homelessness, and got to do a number of different research reports where I got to learn through the process. And as I did more and more of this work, I kept coming back to this question. And this is actually not a question I asked myself, but something I heard from a fellow named David Perks, who runs the Gulf Coast Community Design Center in Mississippi. And he said, you should think about your career as the intersection of these two things, what you're good at doing and what you think is important to do. And so the more I thought about this, the more I tried to reflect on what is it that I really want to do. I really want to be doing community design work, but I also really love doing research and writing. So can I find a way to merge the two of those? And that was that next kind of core insight that I came to. What do I actually want to spend my time doing? And I think what it came to for me was realizing that I'm really passionate about graphic design and research. It's just something I love doing, and I can focus that work on the area of community design. And so I can feel like I'm sort of bridging the gap. And at the same time, I decided to start sort of design collective focused on community design work here in New Orleans, so I could be doing that work firsthand. So again, going back to that idea of pursuing multiple paths, finding what you want to actually be doing day to day, and finding ways to fill the gaps if the career opportunities in front of you don't provide all of those.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in and say that I think that it's great to ask yourself these questions at these different levels, right? What do I want to spend my days doing? What topics interest me? How do I like to work? And then you can triangulate a way through that, you know, checks the box on as many of these as possible. I think what we tend to do sometimes is think about the topic, the issue or the topic, and that becomes primary. You know, I think it comes from that question of what are you passionate about? But I think that a fulfilling career is about an alignment of a couple of different things. It might be, I hate sitting at my desk, I really want to be on site. So how do you solve for that, right? And then starting to look at, you know, it's really a design problem, right? How do you solve for the multiple modes of work, topics, impacts you want to make? And you may not always be able to get all of them at once, right? It may be about, you know, as Gilad talked about, a kind of, you know, at this point in my career, I'm doing this, and then I added this building block, and then I added that, but starting to ask those multiple questions and then trying to see, are there ways where I could get more of them and stack them all up in one, you know, not two birds with one stone, I guess. To feed two birds with one scone is PETA's. That's PETA's released a set of idioms that are less harmful to animals. So feed two birds with one scone.
Yes, I love it. And I think it's really important to recognize that those interests and those passions might change. So you don't have to think about this as being set for your whole life, but just being set for the present, and set check-ins for yourself. So down the line, you can say, okay, it's been 6 months. Let me check back in and see if the work that I'm doing right now still aligns with what my goals and passions are. So as I asked myself this question, I realized that, as I mentioned, research was something I was deeply passionate about and wanted to focus my time on doing. So this leads to kind of the origins of proactive practices. And I'll go over this very briefly for anyone who's new. And I apologize for the repetition for anyone who's already read all the case studies and knows this whole story. So Maya and I and our other research partner, Nick, were all working for public architecture. And we started recognizing that there were tons of exhibitions, publications, and events all focused around projects in public design. But there was very little focus on practice, lead to an entire firm or an entire organization's body of work rather than just one standalone project. So we started looking into that. We started trying to find out, are there practices that do this? And if so, how do they do it? And our early research led to some quick strategies, some things we saw happening at different firms around the country, such as using temporary projects to test ideas, and how a temporary project could allow you to gain some new insights and have a proof of concept and lead to a larger project. Or how non-physical outcomes could be actually really beneficial to create project opportunities. Running different salon dinners, exhibitions, or potlucks could help build a constituency that could lead to project opportunities. So we started developing all different types of strategies like this, and really through observations and interviews with firms around the country doing the work. But as we started taking a step back, we realized we were missing something. We realized that what we were seeing were just snapshots. Each of these firms were dynamic. They were changing month to month, if not week to week. And the field as a whole was changing and evolving as we went. And so what we realized was that these strategies that we thought were essential to practice were really just small parts of a much larger picture. And so we realized that if we wanted to actually understand what it means to run a practice, we would need to zoom out and do a little bit more comprehensive research to understand the ins and outs of each business model, not just one specific strategy they were employing. So this is how we sort of expanded our work. We got a little bit more rigorous with our research, developed selection criteria, really dug into each firm before we spoke to them, did extended interviews, we had follow-up questions, we spent a lot of time analyzing and synthesizing everything we learned. We got all of that reviewed by experts in the field, and then we finally produced a set of case studies that go through a number of different categories and really look holistically at a firm and how it works. So I'm not going to go through all 10 of them right now, or all of the sort of dozens of strategies we've pulled out, but I want to highlight just a couple that have sort of risen to the top that seem to resonate across case studies and seem to be fairly characteristic of how this work happens around the country. So the first one, or the first couple, come from Mass Design Group, which many of you probably have heard about before. They're very well known now, and some seem as a sort of poster child of this movement, a very successful nonprofit design firm. And they've developed a number of really impactful and really efficient strategies that help them do their work really effectively. So the first one is thinking about how they can shift from a project type to an impact type. And this is something that really any firm can do in the early stages of framing a project. Thinking about not just what is the project, what are you working on? Is it a commercial residence? Is it a large-scale institutional facility? Or is it some hospital or larger, anchor institution? Instead, thinking about what's the type of impact that that project could have. Are you trying to address health and well-being, or social equity, or environmental resilience, or any number of other impacts? So this is really important for thinking about how you frame the project as a whole. There's a lot of sort of subtle and somewhat subconscious ways that thinking about a project specifically can start to bleed into your process and force you towards more capitalistic or more profit-driven motives. But if you're really focused on impact from day one, you're going to be thinking more about impact and thinking more about how every part of the project can lead towards that impact. And I'll get to this a little bit later on in terms of process versus product. The other really important thing they do is think about or reframe from an impact challenge to a design challenge. So this is kind of doing the same in reverse. So you're trying to, for example, address health and well-being. And so on one of their projects, Mass Design Group's impact challenge was, how do we reduce the risk of spreading airborne communicable diseases? And rather than trying to address that as one large overarching question, they said, okay, how do we put this into design terms? How do we turn this impact challenge back into a design challenge? And so for them, that came to this question of, how are we going to design ventilation systems and building layouts that can maximize hourly airflow in order to decrease the risk of spreading airborne communicable diseases? So again, this is thinking a lot about how we translate, how we can shift our mindset slightly at the beginning of a project in a way that can really impact the way we think about the project throughout.
That's also how clients are thinking, right? They're not thinking about institutional, residential, they're thinking about the problems that they're trying to solve and the value they're trying to generate. So it's about alignment.
Definitely. I think that's really important and a perfect bridge into their next strategy, which is thinking about partners, not clients. And so this is something that we've seen time and time again in various different models. And I would say it's almost ubiquitous across the public interest design world, which is that when you're approaching a project, you should be thinking about the people that you're working with or the people that you're working for, not as your clients, but as your partners who have valuable knowledge. Whereas you might be bringing technical expertise, those partners are really bringing a ton of local expertise that you simply don't have because you're not a part of that community. And the really brief example here is from Mass Design Group. They initially thought that they were going to have to fly in a bulldozer from China just to excavate the site. It was going to be incredibly time consuming and expensive. And as they talked through some of these challenges with their partners, with the community members they were working with, they all said, hey, we work in construction sites all the time. We could excavate this site by hand. And when they started doing the calculations and running the numbers, they realized that doing this was not only going to save them money and save them time, but it was going to allow them to excavate in a more exact and precise way that would lead to a better outcome. And they've seen instances of things just like this come up time and time again. When you work with the community as partners, not as clients or as people receiving the service you're providing, they can really valuably contribute to the process and contribute new expertise and ideas that might not have occurred to you otherwise. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the back end, looking under the hood at what Mass Design Group is actually doing. And this is a part of a survey that we asked every firm we spoke to. We wanted them to provide a breakdown of their activities, what they actually spend their time doing day to day. And I think what's really important to recognize here is that a full quarter of their time is devoted to advocacy, engagement, and capacity building. That means that what they're doing to make their project successful expands far beyond the scope of what we think of as traditional design services. And that means that shifts their role within the project. They're not just a service provider, but they're also an advocate for the community. They're also someone who leads engagement sessions to gather more input. And they also focus on how their work can build capacity for the communities that they're working with. All of that is part of a more holistic approach to what it means to be doing community-based design or public interest design or design that can create a social impact. It means expanding beyond the traditional design activities to include these more non-traditional activities, many of which oftentimes fall into the realm of organizing and advocacy work that has been, traditionally outside of design, but we're seeing increasingly being brought into design. And while it's important to bring those into your process, I just want to note that it's also important to, as some might say, stay in your lane and understand that while advocacy should be an important part of your project and organizing should be an important part of your project, as a designer, you're not an organizer. So you should be working with organizers and partnering with the folks who already have been doing this work, who already have the expertise and the track record and the relationships to do it well. So the next one I want to talk about is Util. And they are sort of a design firm crossed with a think tank. And this is a quote from one of their founders, Tim Love. And he said, "Work in the public realm presents a massive untapped market for design and planning practitioners interested in having real impact on cities." So this was very much their approach to their own work in Boston. They took a hyper-local approach and learned as much as they possibly could about their own municipality, about the specifics of zoning and other policy and laws specific to the neighborhoods they lived and worked in, and tried to find opportunities to then work with the government, being experts both in law and policy and in urban design and planning. So what they did was focus very specifically on a set area, on a specific space within their neighborhood where their office was located, and say, let's learn about everything we possibly can in this neighborhood. Let's map every single building and every street. Let's understand how specific zoning laws and ordinances are being applied to this area, and let's become complete experts on this area. And I think this kind of relates back to a larger insight we've talked about a few times, which is that you don't need to go around the world to have an impact. You can have a really important impact in your own backyard. There's plenty of challenges and issues to address wherever you live, and becoming really well informed and knowledgeable about the place that you live can actually lead to a lot of interesting opportunities and ideas for projects. Another thing that Util really focuses on is this idea of balancing profits. And this area that I've highlighted in red is to point out that they have these two kind of primary areas of work with developers and work with governments. And as you can see, the work with developers accounts for 40% of their workload, but accounts for 60% of their revenue. While work with governments similarly provides 40% of their work, but only provides 25% of their total revenue. And when speaking with Tim about this, he explained this is something that they're very aware of, and they monitor very closely to make sure they're maintaining a balance. They realize that the work with governments leads to all kinds of exciting opportunities and more importantly, opportunities to have a real impact on their city and their region. But it doesn't always pay so well. So they balance that with work for-profit developers. They try and incorporate public interest motives into that work as much as possible, but they recognize that some of that is simply work for developers that they need to take on to make up the revenue to pay their bills. So it's really important to think big picture about your entire practice and its profits and losses to understand what you have the capacity for and where you can make small trade-offs.
I also want to say that I think it's not just oh, here's our bread and butter and here's what we love and pays the bills. There's also, because I think they actually enjoy both of them, I think there's a strategic relationship between the government work and the developer work. So if you are the one who wrote the zoning code for the city of Hartford, Hartford's new downtown area, then you are a go-to expert for how to do that work, right? For how to get stuff approved, how to build stuff that works for developers. So it's not just a revenue balancing strategy. I think it's also a really strategic positioning strategy.
Definitely, I think that's a really important point. And again, speaks to that larger point I'll come back to of process and product, seeing everything that you do as part of these long-term goals you're working towards. So the next one I want to talk about is Andrea Cochran landscape architecture. And we sort of jokingly refer to this as the Robin Hood design firm model. Now what they do is primarily take some portion of their profits each year and devote that to pro bono projects. And that's shifted and changed throughout the years. And it also changes depending on what's going on financially with the firm and with their clients. But one thing that Andrea spoke about very explicitly was recognizing her own firm's limitations. This is their staff, and nearly all of them are architects, designers, planners, engineers, people who are really focused on the technical aspects of the built environment, and it's what they're really known for these extremely beautifully detailed and well-executed designs that really accomplish exactly what the client or the community is asking for. What she spoke about is the fact that they realize they're not community organizers. They're not grant writers. They're not people who have expertise in the myriad ways, in the myriad types of skills and tools that are needed to really be doing public interest design work effectively. And so she talked about recognizing limitations, understanding what her staff can and can't do, and finding ways to partner with others to complement those skills, not to try and take over a whole nother area of work, but rather to work with people who are already solidly based in that area. Another thing she spoke a lot about, and this speaks to kind of profits and losses and how you can do this within a for-profit firm, is how she found doing pro bono projects or doing projects for non-traditional clients or working directly with communities actually had a lot of mutually beneficial results for her practice. So when they were working on high-end projects for wealthy clients, they were able to test out all different types of strategies and design methodologies that a pro bono client wouldn't be able to afford. And so they were able to take some of those strategies and things that they learned on the for-profit side and bring them over to the pro bono side. And on the flip side, the pro bono projects they worked on with communities often had really challenging design constraints, whether they were spatial limitations or needs for visibility or needs for addressing, the needs of specific populations in a building. And that led her staff to have to come up with all kinds of creative design solutions. Many of those creative design solutions, they then ended up implementing on for-profit projects later on because they were just really interesting challenges that led to new innovative ideas. So this is just one quick example of the way in which balancing both your for-profit work and your kind of community-based or maybe pro bono work can actually reinforce one another and help propel the entire firm forwards.
Yeah, I just want to say, because this actually recently came up in a coaching session, it's like, oh, we don't have enough design time to work on this. There's not enough fee. Woe is me, woe is me. You know, but there's a fundamentally different stance of, okay, less budget. How do we get the same level of quality? How do we really make smart design decisions to get the same incredible experience with less? You don't necessarily want to have to do that on all your projects, but occasionally if you see it as a test, I mean, what an incredible framework and approach rather than just, oh, let's complain about how terrible this is.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I see one of the comments from Peter was saying that he's heard from another designer that she would speak about their private client work as a way to support their affordable housing work. And I think that's really smart to think about. How can you be balancing types of clients and bodies of work? Again, speaking back to Uteel's idea of balancing profits and revenues. So the next one I want to speak about is Inscape Studio and Inscape Publica, which is a sort of hybrid for-profit, nonprofit firm that has both a nonprofit arm and a for-profit arm. So one thing that they've done really effectively, especially in formalizing their firm, is leaning into the things that they were already doing. And so they were the people who were working at the firm were already working with a number of local economic development organizations and working with a number of local community organizations. They were already providing a number of sort of free services, pro bono design work, and meeting with them regularly to talk through schematics and other projects. And what they realized is, listen, we're already doing all this stuff. Let's just formalize that and call it something else. And Greg, the founder, spoke a lot about how that was critical to their early success, to have already been doing the work in small ways, sort of testing out their approaches and their methods. And then once they had sort of honed that in and they already knew what they were doing, then they were able to say, okay, now let's formalize this as Inscape Publico, and it will provide this set of services. And that's already been tested. And they already have a track record and a number of clients that they were already working with to sort of prove what they knew what they were doing. So this is really important to think about if you're trying to start new areas of work from within a firm. What does your firm already have experience doing? What are ways that they've either just been working with nonprofit clients and could take the next step on that, or been doing volunteer service projects once or twice a year that they could expand upon, or doing any other type of work that you already have the skills and expertise for that might expand into a larger body of work focused on public interest design. The other thing that Inscape did very well was recognizing where the existing gaps already were. They wanted to be very conscious to not create things that weren't needed. And so they spent a lot of time talking with the local community groups and economic development organizations that they had been working with to understand what are your needs, what's missing, where are there funding gaps, and how could a design firm like us be supportive of you? I think that's really important, not just in this type of work, but more broadly in all of public interest design, thinking about how can you ensure that the work you're doing is filling an actual need or filling an actual gap. And that can sometimes take a long period of time and research and conversations and relationship building to really understand. But we've seen time and time again that it pays off, that it's really valuable, that taking the time and energy and personal effort to go out and meet people, talk to people, and hear their stories and understand what their needs are is going to ultimately lead you to be able to do your work better, to be able to provide services and products that are going to actually fulfill their needs and thus actually be doing work in the public interest. And finally, I want to talk about a kind of a different type of example. As most of you know, Gensler is one of the largest firms in the world, and they are also really interested in doing this work in offices around the country, and in particular in their Baltimore office. And some of their leaders really started this by asking a broad question to themselves, asking what would it mean for social impact to function as a core aspect of a firm's everyday approach to design? And they started off with this idea of, could we make a small studio within our practice? And through the process, they realized that wasn't possible for a number of reasons. But the more effective answer was to actually integrate this type of thinking and this type of work into everything they do and into their approach broadly. So they started developing a few strategies for how to do this firm-wide. One was really investing in relationships. They realized that doing community-based work and doing public interest design work is all about relationships, not surprisingly, with the community, with people in the public realm. So they spent a lot of time going to community meetings, not leading their own community meetings, but going to other community meetings around the city and specifically in the neighborhoods that they were hoping to work in, to just listen, to understand what the issues were, to hear from existing community leaders about the challenges they were facing, and to be actual participants and members of those communities rather than technical experts who were coming in to try and help and support in some way. I think that's something we've heard from firms time and time again, that it's really important to see yourself not just as a technical expert, but as someone who's a part of this process and invest accordingly. And in many cases, this means spending a long amount of time building relationships and actually becoming part of a community before you dive in with ideas about how to use design to improve situations. Another thing that Gensler really thought about a lot was the non-financial returns. They realized that doing the work up front of going to community meetings and building relationships and scoping projects and all the other steps they would need to spend time doing in order to build this practice around socially engaged work was going to require a lot of time. And that was going to require a lot of money on their end, a lot of dollars from people's staff time, hourly wages. And so they started thinking, well, is this going to help us in other ways? Are we going to actually see returns on this money? And the more they dug into this, the more they realized there were a host of non-financial returns that made these investments extremely worthwhile. And these are just a few of sort of the top ones that have really risen up through the years that they've seen as being most valuable. So most importantly, they talk about the fact that the rising generation of designers is more focused than any other before on doing socially relevant work. And so having these types of projects in their portfolio and on their website has been essential to staff recruitment and retaining the staff that are already there. People want to work for a firm that's doing this kind of work. So the more the firm invests in it, the more they're able to attract the most talented designers to work with them. They've also seen that building relationships and going to community meetings and establishing themselves more within the city that they work in has actually been really helpful for finding new clients. They've learned a lot about the community and they've found ways to get involved. And they've also just been approached by for-profit clients that said, hey, you mentioned something about design. Can I talk to you? I have a project that I actually really need to hire a design firm for. They've also talked about how the expertise that they've gained through this process has been applicable not just to these projects, but to all projects. Firm-wide, they've seen how lessons they've learned through public interest-focused work have been really valuable in their urban design studios and in their interior design studios and in their consulting practices. There are these core lessons that can go far beyond the scope of just community-based work. They've also seen that this work has been really valuable for marketing and PR. It helps build their image. It helps, again, attract new potential clients as well as staff members. And finally, it's led to a lot of business development insights. It led them to rethink a little bit about how they want to grow their business, what direction they want to grow their business in, and what that means for the future of the firm as a whole. So all of this is just to say that while it might be a little bit risky or financially scary to dive into doing the work that leads to public interest design projects, you are actually gaining quite a bit of return on that investment of time and money, even if you don't see it directly back in dollars in your bank account. So we're getting towards the end, and I know I promised I would share some secret sauces, so I want to reveal what they are. And as I mentioned earlier on, there is not one secret sauce, but there are multiple secret sauces. And the secret, which is really not that secret, is that each firm has to come up with their own sauce. Each firm needs to develop their own little concoction based on a number of different factors, based on who they are, what skills they have, what lived experience they have, where they're living, and what opportunities exist in that place, what types of resources and networks they have access to, what their passion is, what they want to be working on, what their staff wants to be working on, and a number of other factors. The point here is not that there is one set of criteria to look at and say, okay, now I know I'm this model, or I'm this model, or I'm that model, but rather to look very subjectively at your own practice, whether that's you individually as a sole practitioner, or as a small collective of people trying to start new projects, or as employees at a large firm. What is your context? What do you have access to? What do you have interest in? What is appropriate and makes sense for you? What is needed in the place that you're working? And what are the core issues that are really important to the people in the communities where you live? So I think that while there isn't a direct answer, there's a lot that can be gleaned through these case studies. And some of the strategies that I shared today are just a small sampling of the strategies that you can pull out from reading the case studies. So I know this is a sort of self-promotional, plug, but I'll just say, if you want to learn more, please read the case studies and read them carefully. Really think about each of the strategies that we talk about and think about how each of them could be changed, manipulated, or just directly applied to the work that you want to do. And try and come up with your own little combination. Try and figure out how piecing together a few different strategies from a few different practices could really allow you to create something new that hasn't been done before, or allow you to just do something really effectively that's already going on somewhere else. I think it's really important to call out the fact that just because someone else is doing it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it as well. This work is really needed all over the country, and if someone's doing a great job of it in Minneapolis, it's also needed in Dallas, and it's also needed in San Francisco. So if you do find someone who's got the model that you really want to replicate, call them up, talk to them, do a case study on them. I can tell you that almost everyone we spoke to through the course of 5 years of research was excited to get on the phone with us and talk to us about their model because they wanted to share that information. So go out and talk to those folks and find your own secret sauce.
Yeah, can I share one quick thought, which is that
Definitely.
we're in an era where there's an overwhelming amount of information, and sometimes there's actually an underwhelming amount, depending on what you're up to, of implementation. And so, one idea in the case studies, right? If you read one section of one case study and you said, what actionable idea is in this, and what would it mean for me on my practice or my career to apply this? That's oftentimes so much more effective than having all the ideas and then doing nothing about them. So I think sometimes we'll take in information because we're afraid to take action. And the best thing that you can do is to say, okay, I just need one life-changing or business-changing piece of insight, and then the real impact is in the doing.
Could not agree more. Start small and keep going. So while you need to come up with your own secret sauce, I wanted to share just 3 common strategies that we've seen really across the board that seem to be foundational for a lot of these different approaches and models. The first is process as a part of product. So we've seen this time and again. Design firms are really shifting their thinking and their approach from, I'm going to produce this building or this space or this physical object, and it's going to accomplish X goal. In public interest design and community engaged design, you really need to shift that thinking to understand how the entire process and everything you do up until the product can actually help work towards that same outcome that you're trying to achieve. So a quick example of this would be Mass Design Group. They were thinking about not just how does the hospital we create become a driver of economic development, but how can the building of that hospital also be an economic development driver? And so they were able to hire, train, and recruit locals to do all of the construction and building. So in the process of creating this hospital that would be an economic driver, they also created new jobs and trained people in areas of work that they would be able to continue as areas of employment for the future. So the process was part of the product in a way. Another really important strategy, which maybe is less of a strategy and more of an idea to keep in mind, is recognizing root causes. So often the issues we're trying to address in community engaged design work are actually the result of systemic inequalities and injustices in our environment and in our society. And addressing just the symptoms of those will not fix the root causes. So when you're approaching this work, I would really encourage everyone to think not about what the outcomes are first, or not about what the symptoms are that we need to address or the direct challenges we're trying to solve, but what are the root causes? Where did all these come from originally? Try and trace them back historically and understand, why does this exist in the first place? And then incorporate that knowledge and that understanding into every aspect of your design process. And then finally, and this is something we already spoke about earlier, so I'll just mention it briefly, is this idea of expanding the scope of design services. We've seen on literally every single firm we've looked at, they do work outside the scope of what is seen as traditional design service. And so you really need to expand your thinking about what does it mean to be doing community engaged design work. It means doing a lot more than just pre-design to construction administration. And that really changes and varies depending on the project. And many more things. I'm just saying this to emphasize that these are just a few common strategies, and there are many, many more. So that wraps up our time here, but we do have until the top of the hour, the next about 15 minutes, to answer any questions you have. So I'm just going to share a few quick opportunities in the next minute. And while I do, please think about any questions you have for either myself or for Maya, or broad questions about these strategies, and type them into the chat box, and we'll try and answer them as best as we can. So while you're typing, I just want to share a few other things. So one are some questions that you can ask yourself, and you can ask your own colleagues when you're trying to do this. One is what your intentions and goals are, which is a really important question as a sort of guiding star or compass. What really are you trying to do here, and how do you get focused on that? Secondly, what are your limitations? I think it's really important to recognize not just what you want to do and what you can do, but what you can't do, what you don't have the skills for. And finally, really thinking about whether you've spoken to other people, whether you're operating within a silo and just doing what you know to be true, or whether you're going into the community and actually speaking to folks who live these experiences day to day. Okay, that's actually the last slide, and now I'll quickly share an opportunity. So I'm part of an organization called the Association for Community Design, ACD, and we are a national network of community design centers around the country, and we provide a number of resources and opportunities, and one in particular is our conference, which is happening this summer in Greenwood, Mississippi, June 27th to 29th. The primary day will be on June 29th, so if you can only make it for one day, come then. It's a great opportunity to hear more presentations just like this, to talk to folks who are actually doing this work in the field, and to engage in some professional development opportunities around community-based design work. And another concrete opportunity we have going on right now is a new fellowship we're launching through the Association for Community Design. The fellowship application is due pretty soon. It's due May 19th at midnight, and it is online. It's a fairly easy application form to fill out. So please go online, find this, and share this with anyone else you're interested in. It's primarily targeted at people who have somewhere between 3 to 8 years of experience working in this field, who really want to advance their practice and learn more. However, we're very open to applicants of all levels of experience. So if you're interested, please apply. So with that, I will stop and start to answer any questions we might have.
Yeah, so type them in.
Type them into the chat box.
Oh, yeah, take a minute and type them into the chat box. So we've got a question from Forrest, who says, you suggest expanding design services, but business consultants are telling us that that we need to become more specialized in order to do more and do it better. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's an important thing in terms of balancing the profitability of a firm with its focus on creating impact. Those are not mutually exclusive, but there are a lot of trade-offs sometimes. So it sounds like the business consultant is telling you get specialized, because correctly so, that will probably lead you to higher profits. It will lead you to more niche clients that can pay more money for very specific and sort of high-level specialties. But if you're trying to have an impact, that means being able to do more. That means being able to, for example, support a community in writing a grant, or helping the community lead a community planning session, which might be outside the scope of your traditional design services, and honestly, probably won't pay much more, but are going to enable you to better understand the community and to have a better understanding of how you could valuably contribute and have some impact.
Yeah, I want to add one more a kind of shade to that, which is, I think you can specialize and get really clear on what you do by getting really clear on what value you create. And so you may find that, you know, specialization isn't just like, okay, I do this one thing and here's how I do it, et cetera, et cetera. It might be, okay, I do this one thing for this kind of impact for these types of clients, right? Getting really specific and niching down, which is usually a really, really good strategy, as long as you make sure that your niching isn't, you know, tied to an industry that's super cyclical, and then your business falls apart during, you know, the time that industry, you know, goes down. as long as you have some strategies to deal with risk, niching down is really effective. And I think you can niche down in ways that also do impact. So you may say, we don't do everything, right? You know, the example we gave in the last session is Latent Design. That was a general contractor, and they were also becoming a vendor, and they were, you know, doing a whole set of things. And you may decide that you're not going to do all of those things, but you are going to be a general contractor and you're working with this type of client doing this type of thing. So I think you can strategically expand what you do, but still have it be part of a really clear business strategy as long as you're laser focused on the type of value you create and for whom. Okay, another question I have is expanding scope of services. Do you have any good examples for firms or organizations with strong post-occupancy evaluation methodologies?
That is a great question. And unfortunately, I don't have any off the top of my head, but I can share a little bit about some of the challenges there and maybe why I can't think of any examples. From what we've heard from a number of firms, they've said it's really difficult to get a client to pay for post-occupancy evaluations because they just don't see the value in it. They say, okay, we put all our money into the design process and everything we've created, and now we have it. We don't want to pay more money for you to come back and study us. And we've also found that similarly, when firms are getting support from foundations, they're really interested in supporting the creation of something rather than the evaluation of it afterwards. So I would say if you're trying to find resources to fund post-occupancy evaluations, I think public health is a space that might be kind of fruitful in searching. There's a strong tradition in public health of assessing and evaluating the impacts of interventions. And I think we could learn a lot from that field in terms of how they've been able to convince funders and clients that evaluations are really important. But unfortunately, I don't have a great response for this. You know, I think that SEED, which was a sort of response to LEAD, which stands for, I think, social, environmental, and economic design, was an attempt to do that, was an attempt to create a sort of standard way to assess the impact of public interest design work, but it struggles from a number of different challenges, most of which is the funding to actually do that work.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Gilad.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, I think a few, so I don't know a good list of firms to look at. I know a few years ago, Mass Design Group was trying to have evaluation be part of their 4-step process, right? Research, I think design was one of them. There was a third piece, maybe it was construction, and then evaluation. And I remember that they struggled to be able to get that whole scope funded. I think that with a couple of high-profile projects, they either self-funded it or were able, I think that their maternal waiting homes in, I don't remember where they were, but they're somewhere in Africa. I think they were able to get some evaluation. I'm not sure if they self-funded it or if it was part of a high-level partnership or engagement with a foundation. But I do know that some nonprofits find evaluation very helpful to then achieve funding in the future. So it may be about developing a lean evaluation methodology, not to look at everything that you could about post-occupancy evaluation, but to say, what are the 2 to 3 key things we'd like to see change on, and can we develop a lean evaluation methodology to do that? Oh, and Donald is saying that the landscape architecture firm SWA Group has a comparatively robust post-occupancy review initiative, which is great. You're also reminding me that I think the Landscape Performance Institute, I think I might be, if you Google that, I'm sure you'll find the right one, has these case studies that look at the impacts of a project, and the Rudy Bruner Award is also looking at impact, not quite through an evaluation framework, but there may be some nascent resources there.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, thinking about landscape architecture, talk to more landscape architects about this. Landscape architecture is traditionally a profession that has sort of longer timeframes on projects, that thinks about their work, not in terms of what it's going to look like or how it's going to function the day it's completed, but how it's going to function 5, 10, 20 years out and what types of impacts it's going to have. So really lean on your professional peers in related disciplines and ask them about how they think about this as well. I see
So we
we've
have
got
a question that just came into me, so I want to share it, make sure it gets public. Does there exist a clearinghouse with an ACD or elsewhere for accessing business plans, articles for incorporation, et cetera, for CVCs that are in the formation stage?
So that's a great question, and it's something that I can tell you as the director of research for ACD that we are working on currently. So in the past, that has been the function of the ACD conference. It's been going on since the 70s, since before the internet was really a thing, and it was a literal physical place to share those articles of incorporation and the written out business plans. But the conference itself still functions as a space for professional development and sharing. So if you're interested in that stuff, I would really encourage you to come to the ACD conference. And if you can't come, don't worry, we're working on that and getting all of that up on our website. If you're a member of ACD, you'll be able to access all of that and a number of other resources and directories that we're working on developing. Okay, I think we've got time for just maybe one or two more questions if there are any. I'm also seeing another comment from Peter saying the Landscape Architecture Foundation has the Landscape Performance Series, but there is a lot of room for growth in the social side of the valuations. That's a really good point. You know, there is a lot of room for growth around understanding the ways to measure and evaluate social impacts. It's something that a lot of people are thinking about and talking about, especially in the impact investing space. So that's another area where you might want to get a little bit more informed or engaged to learn about how other fields are thinking about this. I think it's really important to recognize that while designers are really kind of, it's very in vogue right now in design to be thinking about social impact. That's common across a lot of other industries and disciplines today, in business, in investing, and a number of other fields. So there's a lot that we as designers can learn from folks in other disciplines as well when we're thinking about impact and community engagement. All right, well, we are just about at time. It's 12:59 here. I'm here in New Orleans, so I'm on Central Time. So I just want to thank everyone once again for coming and attending and for sharing your questions. I hope this was useful for everyone. And I want to remind everyone that we'll be wrapping up this 3-part webinar series next week with our 3rd webinar that Maya is going to share just a little bit more about.
Yeah, so next week we're coming back together. It's going to be really different than these where we've been sharing with you our learnings. We are going to be there with our friend and actually someone who invited us on his podcast about 3 years ago, Mark LePage of Entre Architect, which helps small firm architects get established and achieve business goals. He's going to be moderating, but it's going to be Q&A with us. And, you know, we've got some info to share, but this is really an opportunity for you to get more questions answered. We're going to give you a chance to get off mute, to show your video, to really have it be part of a conversation. And this is your last opportunity to hear from us on this. And we've always wanted this research to go both ways and to learn from you. So next week is going to be all about you. And so we want you to be thinking about what are your burning questions you'd love to get answered, either about ourselves, our work, or the research and case studies. So we'll see you next week, and we look forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.